Oh, what a good clap that was. So, this is the little shit that made me stop playing Bloodborne the first time round. This is the Bloodstarved Beast. Here he is. He doesn't look that threatening now, does he? Look how tiny he is. He's such a little boy. Such a little cutie little boy. Oh, he's so cute and little. Still a little shit though, so it's the Bloodstarved Beast.
A corpse should be left well alone.
First things first, he is a very dark model because we've got some red to play with and there's some sort of like bony kind of detailing on him. I think we can aim to sort of accentuate that a bit, and I think some just basic zenithal highlighting top down would allow us to have a bit more fun with like some contrast paints, I reckon. I'm gonna slap in some white ink. He's been zenithal highlighted. I'm gonna use some contrast paints on him. And I'm thinking Flesh Tearer's Red for the sort of shawl. I'm gonna do a base of Skeleton Horde across his body because it's a lighter tone. And then some Garagak, excuse me Warhammer folks if that's a terrible pronunciation, but Garagak Sewer contrast paint because it's a fair bit darker of a contrast, and I'll use that to like add in some more shadows as a base. Let's get to work. So first off, Flesh Tearer's Red. We'll just get this on the shawl. I've said it many times before, I'll say it again, is that contrast paints are wonderful to use if you're zenithal highlighting, because the whole point of contrast paints is contrast. It will react differently to different primers underneath. So if you have like pure black, the contrast will have a bit more of a tough time reacting with it because there's not a lot for it to sort of play off. However, if you use things like Grey Sear, which is a really nice primer, most coloured contrast paints, blues, greens, yellows, reds, will work really nicely with that kind of lighter primer. Depending on what you go for, if you use black, dark grey, light grey, white primers, your contrast is going to react differently to that. So you can have a play around and get some different techniques depending on what you want. But what I tend to do is I prime my models black, because then if there are hard to reach places that it's going to be really tough to get a paintbrush in, if it's primed black, it doesn't matter too much because it could just kind of look like shadow. Whereas if you primed it all white, it's going to be more exposed and it's going to show more in places that you might not be able to paint too much. So that's mainly the reason I prime things black. But I also then tend to zenithal highlight them afterwards, because then it will generate the light source. With the light source being on it, if I'm using contrast paints, it's super handy because then you get a different gradient and you get different lightness, you get different lights and brightness on different parts of the model, especially things like this that are so textured and detailed. The red will react differently to the darker undercoats than it will to the lighter undercoats, sort of keeping a really nice contrast. So that's my kind of 2 cents on highlighting and contrasting. So you can see what I was talking about with the contrast, is that we've got much lighter at the top, and the further it goes down you can see that it's keeping that darkness but still got the red tone to it, which is really, really nice. And that's the beauty of contrast paints. Now that we've done the red, we're going to apply some Skeleton Horde to the body, which will just sort of be a light undercoat that we can sort of add darker detailing to. But I'm just going to coat the whole thing in some Skeleton Horde and we can kind of go from there. And I was trying to think, who's my favourite boss from Bloodborne? And I was really racking my brain about that, and I was like, I don't actually know. I'm going to say Lady Maria, because I think she's the most epic boss out of all of them. It's quite a common answer. So if I really try to push the boat out to think of other bosses aside from Lady Maria as who I would have as my favourite, I want to say Orphan of Kos. I kind of dealt with him a lot easier than I did like Lawrence, the first vicar. I struggled a lot against Lawrence, but Orphan of Kos, not so much. But the original point about being, favourite bosses, I was thinking of Orphan of Kos because he is really epic and a really, really fun fight, and it's just pure chaos fighting him. Father Gascoigne is pretty iconic. German's pretty cool. Moon Presence is pretty cool. Lawrence, the first vicar. There you go. That's my favourite. So now that I've got the Skeleton Horde done, I'm moving on to the dark Garagak Sewer contrast. And I'm just going to do this on the sort of dark parts and sort of blend it up into the Skeleton Horde that we've applied. And then once we've got these contrasts laid out, we can start adding some extra details on. Now that we've got him contrasted, he is looking a bit bright for the sort of look that we want, but that's okay. We can start adding some details once the contrast paints have dried and sort of darken him down a bit, dull down these sort of like bright tones a bit, and getting him more in line with how he looks in the game. Now that the contrast has dried, I just bashed my toe! I'm thinking that we'll use some storm vermin fur. I think I'll use just bits of that around. Like it's kind of a tough boss to judge, you know? Like you look at the concept art and you look at the in-game design and it's just really dark. So it's just kind of tough to call on what colours to use, what colours to not use, but you know, it's your own model, isn't it? Like it doesn't really matter too much as long as you like what you're doing and you like what looks good, like go for it. At the moment I'm just painting on some storm vermin fur and kind of just lightly applying some between that gradient of skeleton horde contrast and Garagak sewer. So I'm going to move on to adding some of this darker Skaven Blight Dinge, and I'm going to use this for even darker sort of regions left behind on the model. I think I'm going to paint in some highlights and different tones onto the shawl a bit. So I'm going to start off, we're going to have some of that, some of that, some of that, some of that.
Anything else? Oh, I don't know.
So I'm going with some corn red, word bearer's red, bugman's glow. And I've also got this Lauren Forest, this sort of like dull kind of muted green, which should be quite nice for a little bit of added speck of colour onto the body, so it's not just sort of like dark dingy browns, you know. I think I will start with actually doing that Lauren Forest. So nice thin down layer of it. I'm just going to kind of just go around random little areas, kind of detailing a bit of green here and there. It's almost down to sort of a glaze consistency and even just glazing over some of the shadows as well. Just to get a bit of green tint to them, just to add something a little bit extra, you know. Probably kind of hard to see and hard to tell, but once we look at it in the final close-ups, we should probably be able to tell. So yeah, I think that did something, that's for sure. I think maybe we add some greys in, so maybe some Administratum grey. Maybe I'll add a couple of dashes of Mournfang brown for a couple of like light little splashes of it. Ah, Ludwig. Maybe that's my favourite boss. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I take back everything I said earlier about bosses and favourite bosses. I completely forgot about Ludwig. So I'm going to take some Aberdeen Black, take it down to a glaze consistency. I'm just going to start shadowing up parts of the body just to give him a bit of contrast, especially in all the sort of like little sunken recesses of the body that will need some shadowing added in. So I'm just taking some Bugman's Glow, which is a sort of like beigey pinky tone, so like a darker kind of like Caucasian skin tone. And I'm just around these sort of like little lips and ridges and little pesky little details. I'm just adding in bits of highlights here and there. It's a really kind of messy shawl and it's kind of all over the place in the design, so it's like really ununiform and just sort of like freeball it really. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's just your way. Cool, yeah. With the Bugman's Glow, kind of got these nice like little highlights to the red. Next, we're going to add some different tones in. So we've got some Word Bearer's red. And I'm just going to, again, same as like I did with the Bugman's Glow, just find little pockets of shadows that could do with a bit of extra colour, a bit of extra pop, you know. Okay, Word Bearer's red added. Then I'm going to add some Corn Red, which is sort of like a dark, pinky kind of red. And I'm just going to, again, same as before, this is like a mid-tony kind of thing. Just find little pockets between the highlights and the shadows. Okay, So we've got our sort of like mid-tones, we've got our highlights, we've got our sort of base coat. So what I want to do is just mix some Abaddon black into probably the corn red. And I just want to generate a sort of reddish shadow. I'm going to take it down to a glaze, just start beefing up these little recesses with some darker tones. I'll risk a bit of glazing with some Abaddon black, make that sucker thin. There we go. There's our shawl. Lovely and done. So, like we did with Vicar Amelia, give this guy a manicure and a pedicure. What a lucky boy. So just getting some Abaddon black, just painting these nails in. Cool. Yeah, I think we can call that jobbed. For the sake of the video, here he is from the front. Here he is from the side. Here's his little butt. That about does it, to be honest. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Yeah, let me know your thoughts below. That being said, see you later.
Thank you very much once again, everyone, for joining me for this episode of Bloodborne Models. If you did enjoy today's episode, please don't forget to leave it a like, drop a comment, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And I will see you next Sunday for more Bloodborne Models. But until then, peace out, gang, and don't you dare go hollow.